Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Discovery Road. I'm James Nelson. You know all of those intriguing stories from the Wild, Wild West and the bold tales from frontier days. They wouldn't have been widely known if it were not for one important thing: newspapers. That's right, they called them weekly tear sheets, the Daily Register. Once in a while, they were just rags. But they did something vitally important to the settlement back then. They chronicled life out west. So we're off on a newspaper route to have a very interesting look into the world of newspapers. In the Needles district of Canyonlands National Park, on a large chunk of two-tone brown rock slabs, you find newspaper rock. An outdoor panel of petroglyphs that date back to early civilizations, featuring intermingled shapes and assorted symbols, notched and chipped into animal and humanoid figures. It's a place the Navajo call the rock that tells a story. What it says is simply unknown. In a strange way, the early newsstands are the descendants of newspaper rock, where people find out about everyday life, important events, interesting things in the world all around them.
There's the Provo Tri-Weekly.
At B. Ashworth's Rare Books, Documents, and Collectibles, an old newspaper library archives was rolled out for our cameras. Here's the Salt Lake Telegram, announcing Butch Cassidy was in town, but the law just couldn't grab him. Frank Leslie's Supplement Illustrated newspaper, reporting on the execution of John D. Lee for his role in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. The Utah Mining Journal, the Dixie Times of 1868, and of course, the big kid on the block, the Deseret News.
Well, when Brigham Young and the Latter-day Saints came to Utah, they're out in the middle of basically nowhere, in the desert, Great Basin. And they were very few opportunities for getting news and information from back east and even among themselves. So Brigham Young decided to start a paper.
Introducing the Deseret News, June 15th, 1850, was the first printing. These are rare, original issues of that very early newspaper.
There was something like 350 copies of the first issue that went out. There are very few of them still in existence today. It was made on the old rag paper that the pioneers imported at that time until they ran out, and then they had to make their own rag paper to print newspapers on.
For a time, early Mormon women had their own newspaper. It was called The Woman's Exponent.
This was really became a standard for many, many years among Latter-day Saint women and also a missionary tool to some of their sisters in other areas of the world. It's extremely important that the Latter-day Saints have some way to communicate among them, their members, and here right in this desolate area, as many people thought that passed through here, so far away from the States at the time, and not, became a territory in another year or two later. But this would have been the period of the beginnings of the state of Deseret. And so they were just far away from their neighbors and friends, and it became important that they have a newspaper so they could pass the word among themselves. This is the Deseret News when it moved to Fillmore City. This issue's Wednesday, July 21st, 1858. It was published down where the territorial capital was, which was at Fillmore.
Of course, there were divergent views on life in the rugged West, and so newspapers sprang up like jackrabbits, with colorful names and contrary ideas.
I've never shown this before, but I thought it might be interesting today. This is the rare second newspaper published in Utah, known as the Valley Tan, and that's because it was printed by the soldiers at Camp Floyd.
Camp Floyd and the Mormons, a clash of cultures, when the military occupation introduced outside influences like gambling, dance halls, prostitution, and saloons. And of course, they had their own newspaper.
This particular issue in 1860 has coverage on the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and what they presume was at this early date of the involvement of Latter-day Saints in that horrible experience down there. But the Deseret News and the Valley Tan kind of countered each other for a number of years.
At the newspaper office of the San Pete Messenger in Manti, Utah, another edition is coming to life.
Well, tell me what happened.
So it was some adults that were highly intoxicated, and they no, it was at the car wash in Ephraim, and he has some pictures of some stuff that he's going to give to me, and it's still under investigation of what really happened, but that
wow. You put the quarters in before I do, so I'm going to stab you?
No, it was something to do with drugs.
The editor, reporters, and other staff members are discussing the day's news.
Took probably 20 cases off of the calendar that were pending, including this guy's case. And what they're going to do now is they're going to schedule his initial appearance separate from the rest of the calendar. And I've got questions in now to the
probably
state.
In a more secure location or...
They're determining what story should be covered, the best angle for covering the story, and they're exchanging information on what they know so they don't miss anything before the story makes it into the newspaper.
And this might be an opportunity to take pictures of their bank staffs as a group, take some nice pictures at their dinner. Why don't you call up Darren Dyring and ask him if this is an opportune time to do it. If there's something on my rundown that isn't on my rundown that should be, then I'm hoping one of my staff people is going to call it to my attention. Oh, by the way, did you hear that there was a major theft at a job site, and Robbie Layton, who's a quite well-known businessman in our county, had a whole lot of tools and supplies stolen. It's a grand larceny kind of thing. You might want to have something on that. So that now we've got the rundown done.
For more than 20 years, under the direction of Suzanne Dean, the San Pete Messenger has become a standard of journalistic excellence. This wall of awards recognizes the quality coverage year after year. The news stories, sports stories, photographs, editorials, even the look of the paper, among the very best.
I've published more than 1,000 newspapers, and I have been there for every one of those newspapers.
Nominate for the Democratic Party's leader in 1960, Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas.
It all started when Dean was in elementary school. She heard radio broadcasts of the 1960 political conventions. The intensity and excitement and much of the real-life drama was being framed by a correspondent named Nancy Dickerson.
Admittedly, I didn't have the problem that some of my people had of opposing Senator Humphrey and Morse in 4 primaries.
You always knew he was around, from a personal point of view. He had tremendous personal power.
Life magazine did a picture portrait on Nancy Honchman Dickerson, and boy was she glamorous, and boy did she get to all of the fancy parties in Washington. I was just smitten.
It was a glamorous invitation to what would become her lifelong career in journalism, and eventually fulfilling her dream of having a newspaper of her own.
She had a first-hand view of what government was doing, and I really felt that government was very important, and being a reporter gives you a front row seat to watching that process.
The San Pete Messenger here, so...
Dean worked for the Deseret News and the Ogden Standard Examiner, but work on a small-town newspaper, she says, completely different. And running the San Pete Messenger, a bit like being in the living room or at the kitchen table with everyday working people.
Well, that gives me a lead.
You get to know people much more intimately, and you understand what they're going through and what they've gone through and what they've accomplished and what they've surmounted.
The big news stories and government work will always be covered by Dean's newspaper, but you'll also find the little things that are very important to the readers.
Hey, so I got your email, but it's not first quarter, it's only second. Yeah, so we need first quarter and second quarter because we only run it twice a year. So we're gonna combine them, and what we'll do is we'll have the whole list, and then if they made both, we'll put an asterisk by it. So that was the North San Pete High School, and we published their honor rolls twice a year, and so they were just sending us our first and second quarter honor rolls so that we can publish that in the paper.
That's important to people to see that.
Yeah, parents like to see their kids' names in the paper.
As a youngster, Dean found her family name mentioned in the Holbrook Tribune when they visited Joseph City, Arizona.
We always got the Holbrook Tribune, and we went into it and read it. They had a country correspondent column where anytime we visited Joseph City, our family's names were in the paper. It was Maxine Miller, Dean and Raymond Dean, and their children, Suzanne, Paul, and Marcia, visited their grandparents, John and Clara Miller, in Joseph City over the week of such and such and such and such. And that was really something to see my name there. Seeing her name in the newspaper is what residents throughout San Pete County and beyond have gotten used to, right along with the elite level of journalism she brought with her years ago. But Suzanne Dean says the time to move on is knocking at the door. In terms of the San Pete Messenger, there might have been a day or two when I slacked a little bit, but for the most part, I've given it all I had, and that's all any of us can do. I think we'll probably run it on the front page. A newborn baby was baptized into the small-town newspaper world with pungent printer's ink, clacking metal, and slapping folding sheets of the latest bulletin.
I would wake up in the morning or in the evening to the characteristic sounds of a linotype right below my bedroom. It has, if you've ever been around a linotype, it has a very characteristic rhythm of the mechanical part of it, and that was part of the drumbeat of my life. It was like my heartbeat.
The family was a newspaper family through and through. Uncles, grandfathers, grandmothers, cousins, and brothers all had a hand in the small-town newspaper world. In Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, and among them all easily more than a century of experience. And the newspaper jobs, well, they could be found simply by asking the unofficial code words. Got any situations?
If you held a union card, you could go into any shop and say, do you have any situations available? And if they did, you put your name on the board and you're hired instantaneously. No interview. Your card says you've got the skills. You walk in, they've got a position, you're hired. You don't have time to make up your mind, you're hired. And so Grandpa then sent a telegram to my grandmother and said, bring the cow, bring the kids, bring the furniture, and come to Cheyenne.
In those days, nearly everything made it into the newspaper, from birth announcements to weddings, the school lunch menu, mining accidents, and, oh yes, the police report.
And occasionally when they would run something, or the person who was involved knew they were going to run something that included something they'd done in the police report, I remember those people coming in and trying to either plead or intimidate to get them to stop from running that. And I think that's a point at where the rubber hit the road of, we're going to run it. Too bad. You should have thought about that before you got the DWI or whatever it was.
After wrestling with the ever-changing technology, James Lee cashed out. sold the newspaper, and moved the family to Colorado Springs so he could learn the new printing technology. While traveling on a trip from California, he stopped in the Salt Lake City newspaper offices and was offered a job. He finished his career working at the Newspaper Agency Corporation in Salt Lake City. It was the end of an era.
He lived through 3 eras of newspapering, and I think it made him sad, really, because he talked fairly frequently about hating to see that era pass by, because you get used to it, you get fond of it, and then everything changes.
The Tooele Transcript Bulletin has been the newspaper in Tooele County for over 125 years, and it's still going strong. Inside the huge building where the printed word comes to life, it's a bit like watching a circus. Printing press machines humming and clanking behind one massive concrete wall, and on the other side, a warehouse of activity. Magazine and special edition publications are being punched out and prepared for the customer. And of course, they're rolling out of the newspapers. Lots of newspapers. This place is the printing company for many of Utah's small-town newspapers. The Beaver County Journal, the Gunnison Valley Gazette, and the Times News for Juab County, just a few of them.
We have a deadline to get a couple of these newspapers done to ship down for post to Millard County and Nephi. And then so we have to get that done here within a couple hours.
The elephant-sized press machines pound and push with enormous power and sound, while the thin paper slips and rolls and twists and turns until all is stopped for a checkup and some adjustments.
Sometimes you get lucky and you get it kind of real close on the first try, and sometimes you're fighting, and that's just the nature of the work.
So the Tooele Transcript Bulletin has been around since 1894. It's been in my family since 1898, when my great-grandfather purchased the paper when it was 4 years old. He did some editing for the previous owners, and then the previous publisher passed away, and his widow sold it to my great-grandfather. It's been in our family ever since.
What are you doing, Michael? I am going through and fine-tuning the ink. So I'll kind of look at it and see what color I'm missing or I'm too heavy on and adjust that. I'll take a gander at the proof every now and again, make sure I'm adjusting the right colors.
Once the corrections are done and eyeball inspections complete, here comes the thundering noise of newspapers rolling off of the presses, a special kind of music to the publisher.
Right now we're printing about 4,000 per week. We were a twice-a-week newspaper up until a year ago when we switched it to once a week. And we had paper carriers before. We've switched it to mail. And our online presence is quite good, actually. I would say we're the #1 read website in Tooele County. And we have over 50,000 views per month.
We love Ken Sanders' Rare Bookstore, home of the treasure hunt, for maps, photographs, books, postcards, art pieces, and old newspapers. And visiting this old place, always cathartic.
Well, I live in the past, and I, like any collector mentality, I like to collect things that are uncommon.
Sanders gave us a fascinating lesson about what newspapers were made from in the early years.
Now, the Desert News, the first newspaper here, it was originally printed on 100% cotton rag. The early issues would beg their subscribers to, rags, rags, give us your rags. They would trade you for, if you'd give them a bundle of cotton clothing, they could pulp that and turn it into paper. It wasn't paper. What we think of as paper, wood pulp paper, doesn't come in until the 1870s as widespread use.
More than a century later, the term rags was still around, a good fit for the countless underground newspapers.
The electric newspaper, between 67-8 and 69-70, he managed to publish 5 issues of it. That's it. But it was the first. It was followed. Bruce Roberts, a radical SDS guy, and later partners in Cosmic with myself and Steve, published the second one that I know about, the Street Paper, here in Salt Lake City.
The Street Paper had articles on the war in Vietnam, a story on how music exploits women, and pollution was a front page issue. Advertising, a timestamp of the 1970s. A notice to the people of Salt Lake City and surrounding territories that shares in a coffee house are being sold for $10 a share.
And even the boys and girls down in Provo at BYU got into it, man. They published the 7th East Press, which was as underground as you could get in Provo.
Then there is this place, the wide open place like none other, barren, bland, and stunning, the world-famous Bonneville Salt Flats, where a newspaper once told the stories that nobody else would.
For many, many years, they published the Salt Flat News, the only newspaper in the world to give a damn about what happens on the Salt Flats.
It was Richard Menzies and Richard Goldberger who came up with the wide-open idea of the Salt Flat News. And for a time, people were scratching their heads wondering what they were missing out on the Salt Flats.
It was a crazy, eclectic paper, had high school cheerleaders with batons out on the Salt Flats, covering the Bonneville Speed Week, to Deputy Dump, to every strange story that ever came out of our Salt Flats in the West Desert. It was a very eclectic, quirky, wonderful newspaper that, we don't have anything like that left.
After a few years, the newspaper was no longer published. But every once in a while, the old black and white issues find their way out of someone's basement or just pop up in a conversation as a reminder of that special ethereal place way out west.
In terms of community, I think it supports the community in so many different ways. We support the local schools and also the elderly when they're turning a milestone, many anniversaries. There's the big shots for the sports. That's a huge support for the community. And then our businesses that always want to advertise with us. And then this is a fun page for a lot of our seniors and people that love. They always compliment us about the page. We love it. We also have a really important piece, which is a coloring page for the different businesses. And this time we have the Valentine's coloring book. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch on the wall. We have a bunch of coloring pages that children come over, and we will give them some candy or something that we'll give away. That's a fun part of my job, to give out the candy.
Certainly the presses have stopped for hundreds, if not thousands, of small-town newspapers all across America, and the internet keeps gobbling up those that remain behind. As for the countless news articles that were written and the news that was delivered for all of those years, well, they will always be part of the iconic landscape of the American West. I'm James Nelson. We'll see you next time out here on Discovery Road.